Good afternoon. I am so pleased to be talking today with all of you, the advocates and workers on the front lines, working every day on behalf of the Commonwealth's children. Seeking justice for victims and fighting human trafficking has always been central to my core mission, both as a public servant and also as a dad of two young children and as a person of faith. The Gospel of Luke tells us children are favored in the eyes of God. It says, but Jesus called the children to him and said, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. We must always work to protect the young and the vulnerable. Before I became governor, I served as Kentucky's Attorney General, and my office made protecting children from abuse and exploitation our top priority. As Kentucky's AG, we prioritized the policing of digital realms where our lives are increasingly lived and where our children can be especially vulnerable. We took action to remove dozens of sex offenders from Kentucky's communities and worked with prosecutors to secure convictions and meaningful sentences for these offenders. Nearly year over year, we found, we arrested, and we incarcerated more child sex offenders than ever before. But we also knew that our survivors deserve our help, deserve our attention, and deserve a platform in which they can help others and create a better world. So I created a Survivors Council to advise us on how to craft policies, services, and training that kept victims at the center of our thoughts and our actions. Donna Pollard, who's here with us today, served on that initial council. Donna, who survived child marriage and exploitation, gave victims a voice on our council. She passed a bill through our General Assembly that had been brought up for decades, and she had the strength to get it done. And we'll have the benefit of hearing from her today. Thank you, Donna, for raising your voice, for continuing to be an advocate, for being a personal friend, and for always wanting to be out there fighting for those who've been wronged and those who've been exploited. My AG office also collaborated with Project Pivot to help develop the research we are talking about today. Now, as your governor, I'm keeping my administration laser focused on protecting all of our kids and all of our people. Today's announcement of $1 million in federal grant funding is going to help our state address the key findings of the University of Louisville Human Trafficking Research Initiative's Project Pivot. That's prevention and intervention for victims of trafficking. The resources made possible through this grant will allow my administration to address research findings that will help us better fight this scourge of human trafficking, and it's going to help us save lives. I'd like to thank Dr. Jennifer Middleton, another friend, who is a principal investigator for Project Pivot and is associate professor at the U of L Kent School of Social Work, and her entire team, which have done amazing work over the years in this crucial area. Sadly, our state has a lot of room for improvement. We consistently rank at or near the top when it comes to child abuse nationwide. We see far too many stories. We never even learn of other stories of children that are harmed in ways that most of us could never imagine, often by the people that are supposed to be protecting them. So we're marshaling the resources, all our resources, to address this scourge. In 2020, Kentucky was one of only 4 states to receive a $1 million grant related to human trafficking from the U.S. Department of Justice's Office for Victims of Crime. With today's announced grant funding, DCBS will engage with the agencies that serve our children across Kentucky to develop and implement an advisory council on human trafficking prevention and awareness. This new council will work to identify a human trafficking screening tool funded by this grant that will be used to reveal victimization for both sex and labor trafficking of children and youth. Those of us that have fought for these kids and sometimes these adults know that oftentimes a victim doesn't initially recognize that they are a victim. But oftentimes it's the horrible acts perpetrated against them that people are told are either okay, are made to believe it's their choice, or are coerced through drugs, violence, and other means. This tool is going to help us identify those that need help that might not be in that place yet to ask for it. It's going to protect children. It's going to save lives. There's no avoiding the fact that Dr. Middleton and her team's findings, they are troubling. It is a difficult and often dark world, and the things that happen to some of our kids not only bring tears to our eyes, but keep us up at night. As a dad, it's a hard thing to imagine, but it's also one that I know it's incumbent on me and all of us to work to prevent for every single child out there. Every child is a child of God. Every child deserves the protection of every adult, and no child ever makes a choice or does anything to deserve these types of acts that are perpetrated against them. Through better knowledge and better understanding, I think we can look for better solutions, and we can do more to help these kids that have been harmed, and we have a duty to try to make whole. So Kentucky, we can do better, and we must. Thank you again for your work on behalf of the Commonwealth's children and in seeking safety and justice for some of our most vulnerable citizens. God bless our Commonwealth. And next, we're going to hear from a true warrior and a scholar. She is both. And I'm told we might actually hear or see her dogs because she's coming to us remotely, Dr. Jennifer Middleton.
Thank you so much, Governor Beshear. Good afternoon, and it is such an honor to be here today. My name is Jennifer Middleton, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Louisville in the Kent School of Social Work, and I also serve as the director of the University of Louisville Human Trafficking Research Initiative. Last month, we concluded a 2-year-long research study called Project Pivot, which examined child trafficking in the Commonwealth. Project Pivot was funded from a grant through the Kentucky Children's Justice Act Task Force, and it was quite a team effort. So I sincerely want to thank Governor Andy Beshear for his leadership in the fight against human trafficking in Kentucky and working with us on this project, as well as our partners in the Attorney General's office and the Department for Community-Based Services for their collaborative work and effort on this project as well. I also want to thank the other members of our research team, especially Emily Edwards, who is our research manager extraordinaire. And then most importantly, I want to thank the incredible survivors who have worked very closely with us to help inform and shape and support our research. Without them, we would not be here today. With that said, I am going to talk about some just brief results from the 3 different phases of our study. For phase 1, we began with a case review of 698 reported cases of child trafficking over a 5-year period between the years 2013 and 2018. Some of the key findings include that a majority of the cases of child trafficking, approximately 90%, had prior child welfare involvement. The majority of the cases, almost 60%, involved family-controlled trafficking, meaning that a family member, most often in this case, it was a parent or primary caregiver, gave offenders sexual access to the child or the children in exchange for money, drugs, or something else of value. And children who were trafficked by family members were found to be younger in age, they were more likely to reside in rural communities, and they were more likely to have multiple perpetrators or buyers compared to children who are trafficked by non-family members. So what we are finding here is that the majority of the time, the crime of child trafficking isn't being carried out necessarily primarily by strangers passing through our towns. It's really happening at the hands of people in our community that we know, live next to, or interact with. And the majority of victims in our state, almost 90%, had prior child welfare involvement. So this has implications for how we educate our communities about child trafficking, as well as how we prepare child welfare workers and first responders to identify and respond to potential child victims. So for the second phase, building on that review of the 698 cases of child trafficking in Kentucky, our research team then interviewed child welfare leaders across the United States to learn more about screening tools that they used to recognize potential child trafficking victims. Our interviews revealed that 24 states have screening protocols, yet only 2 screening tools the human trafficking screening tool, and the commercial sexual exploitation identification tool were found to be validated and successfully utilized across multiple states. In addition, as part of our third phase of this project, our research team reviewed all of the Project Pivot findings with key leaders, advocates, and investigators who served on the statewide human trafficking task force. The task force generated recommendations for DCBS as a result of some of these findings. Some of their key recommendations included hiring a full-time child trafficking investigator, providing evidence-based trauma-informed training for all child welfare staff and leadership, as well as all subcontract service providers, and creating a statewide multidisciplinary advisory council co-led by survivors with the goal of selecting a statistically validated trauma-informed child trafficking identification tool and protocol. In addition to the recommendations for DCBS, the study also pointed to two key policy recommendations. The first was to tap into existing child advocacy centers as anti-trafficking resources. Findings indicated an increased likelihood of child trafficking cases being confirmed if a forensic interview was conducted at a child advocacy center. So as a result, we recommended regional consultants be partnered with and perhaps housed within our regional child advocacy centers. The second policy recommendation was to hold family members accountable. The study revealed that cases involving family members as traffickers were significantly less likely to be substantiated by DCBS and or founded by law enforcement compared to cases that involve non-relative perpetrators, with only approximately 20% of cases being substantiated or founded. So investigators, advocates, and others reported concerns about family members as traffickers being less likely to be charged or perhaps receiving reduced charges or findings in those cases. Identification of the commercial aspect of the sexual exploitation involved in these cases could allow law enforcement to broaden the scope of the investigation to potentially include buyers of commercial sex. Until more buyers of commercial sex are arrested and charged with criminal offenses, the demand for commercial sex with children will continue unabated. Our motto at the U of L Human Trafficking Research Initiative is data-informed change. So we are particularly excited about the fact that the Project Pivot results will hopefully help the state enhance its efforts in combating human trafficking. However, we know from working alongside survivors of human trafficking and trauma that in order for trauma-informed change to occur without causing unintended harm to children and families in the process, all change efforts must be led or co-led by survivors. Without the tenacity and resilience and brilliance of local survivor leaders such as Donna Pollard, we would not be here today. Survivors are our most important advisors and warriors in this fight against human trafficking. So it is with great enthusiasm that I continue to pledge my support and the resources of the U of L Human Trafficking Research Initiative to DCBS, the Governor's Office, and survivors as we continue this fight against child trafficking in Kentucky.
Good afternoon. I am Marta Maria Miranda Straub, and I'm honored to be the Commissioner for the Department of Community-Based Service. I am incredibly humbled and energized by working with our governor, who I knew when he was just an attorney, and he was doing this work then because I was running the Center for Women and Families at that time, and we worked with the Kentucky Domestic Violence Association. Then he became AG, and you saw what happened, right? And now he's governor. So thank you for your stick-to-itness. Thank you for the commitment to ending violence of all forms, but specifically to children. I'm particularly honored and grateful to Dr. Middleton and U of L for the research that you have done. I have been in this field 47 years, dealing with trauma and violence and trying to unpack and prevent violence and trauma. And what I want to say is that all of my clinical experience got validated by your research. So I'm incredibly proud to say that this is reliable and replicable work. We are particularly in need of a tool that will help us assess properly, particularly our child welfare workers. DCBS manages to focus on all human trafficking, including sex trafficking, which is primarily victims of which are women, as well as labor trafficking, where there's a higher percentage of men in that area. We were able to work with our Louisville Metro Police during Derby, and were really helpful and instrumental in being able to work with the police during Derby. Derby really escalates just like Super Bowls and all other events. In case you do not know, human trafficking is the third largest business in the world, only behind drugs and guns. So this is an involvement of multiple layers, and it affects the most vulnerable among us. It is usually full of lies. It is usually full of deception. Folks do not get medical care. And in the case of children, the primary perpetrators are family members. So it is important for our child welfare workers to have an understanding of what human trafficking looked like, both in adults and in children, because the folks being trafficked do not realize that they're being trafficked. And a lot of the agencies, including many of us, social service agencies, do not have the tools necessary to be able to do that. This is now different as a result of Pivot. So we are incredibly excited to be part of, and all the recommendations made by Project Pivot around both policy, which is crucial, training of our child welfare, and developing a council as well as a set of content experts that can provide clinical support and supervision to our staff to be able to move forward. We are excited, we are committed, we are here with you, and we are very grateful to have U of L. We're very grateful to have our governor to be able to help our workers being able to do the right thing by survivors. So I am excited to tell you that we're here to hold families accountable for those who are trafficked children. And we are tapping all of the resource and child welfare agencies to be able to help us do this statewide. So my heart sings because this is an awful scar on our children. It is an incredibly damaging psychological, mental health, and physical on the adults. And what gives me hope and breath every day, 47 years later, are survivors who are the experts of their lives and the experts of what it's like to be trafficked and to be abused by those who are supposed to help you. So it is with great honor that I introduce to you my friend and one of our advocates in Kentucky that I'm most proud to sit with, our wonderful Donna Pollard. Please join us.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Donna Pollard, and I am the founder and CEO of Survivors Corner. We are a nonprofit organization empowering trauma survivors to deepen their healing and become social justice advocates for change. I am also a survivor of child abuse, child marriage, and commercial sexual exploitation. As many of us know, abuse and exploitation often runs through multiple generations. This is certainly the case in my own family. Having grown up being beaten and abused in other ways paved the way for me to become vulnerable to the manipulation my perpetrator used when he began grooming me and ultimately exploiting me. And unfortunately, I must share with you that this was made possible by my mother allowing and even encouraging it because of her own woundedness and unaddressed traumas. In looking at the data from Project Pivot, we can see the scenario play out in the lives of so many innocent children. And as a mother and community leader, I know that each of us who have spoken with you here today are determined to break this cycle so that children can have a shot at thriving in life instead of having to struggle to survive. You know, being here at the Capitol today to acknowledge the great research of Project Pivot and the resulting tools that will ultimately make our communities safer feels like coming full circle in a way. You see, it was back in 2016 that I first attended a press conference where Governor Beshear, who was then Attorney General, spoke of his powerful work in his office and that they were performing to combat human trafficking and empower survivors. It was at this time and hearing his sincere dedication to fostering safety and healing in our communities that were impacted by human trafficking that I realized my perpetrators' crimes against me are not my shame to carry. And through this awareness came the relief of liberation. And I realized that my purpose in this life was to bring this liberation to other survivors, whether it's through my own nonprofit, through my advocacy work, or the incredible partnerships with organizations such as the University of Louisville's Human Trafficking Research Initiative and Catholic Charities' Bakita Empowerment Initiative. These partners understand how critical and meaningful it is to center survivor voices as the truest experts through our lived experiences. For example, Dr. Jennifer Middleton, who you just heard from, of the U of L Human Trafficking Research Initiative, has exemplified allyship and accompaniment since we met in 2016 by providing pro bono consultation for my nonprofit and data analysis for my advocacy. I have also been given the honor and privilege to become a facilitator of an exploitation prevention program through Catholic Charities' Bakita Empowerment Initiative. And because of the leaders that I am surrounded by today, I get to awaken each day knowing that I have the opportunity to inspire strength and healing in the lives of those who are vulnerable and hurting. Yes, I was abused and exploited, but the abuse and trauma is only a snapshot of my story. The rest is rooted in resilience, strength, and ultimately my ability to use my experience to advance the healing of our communities forward. And for any survivors that are suffering in silence, I want you to know you are not alone. You have advocates and allies in each of us that have spoken with you here today, and you matter. You have the power to transform your pain into purpose and break these generational cycles once and for all. And as is the mantra of Team Kentucky, we are in this together, and we will get through this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Your continued example of tragedy into triumph is something really incredible, is a strength that I don't know how you find, but is a bright, shining light. And I know our other survivor leaders as well who are out there. And I know that there are people that hear you speak and see your story and your strength and realize they can do it too. So thank you for all the lives that you impact. And I know there's a lot more work to be done. But when you've got folks like Dr. Middleton and Marta and Donna and so many others that are out there fighting the good fight, there ought to be a better world in front of us. So we got just a couple reporters today. Let's start with Eileen Street from Spectrum News.
Hey, sorry, I had an issue with the unmuting.
No problem.
Hey, I just wanted to ask, when I looked over the Project Pivot report for 2021, it seemed like the focus is on child trafficking. And so this $1 million federal funding grant, is that specifically going to be for child trafficking or human trafficking altogether?
Let's bring up Marta Miranda. And we're focused on child trafficking today, but let's make sure we're clear that all trafficking is evil, is wrong. It's modern day slavery. It's one where people are coerced with violence, with drugs, or through other means. It is absolutely unacceptable. It happens way too often. Most of us don't recognize it, but it's a duty of every single one of us to do something about it. Commissioner.
Thank you for the question. Yes, trafficking, of course, involves adults The majority of trafficked folks are women, usually for sex trafficking. And then we have men mostly for labor trafficking. Today's grant, Pivot, and the screening tool that is focusing on this press conference is on child trafficking. However, we work with Catholic Charities in the Bikita Center to also develop a screening tool that would encompass all other forms of trafficking in addition to child trafficking. So DCVS is committed to all trafficking. The primary form of trafficking that I have experience with is both with sex trafficking as a result of my work at the Center for Women and Families. And 25 years ago, Catholic Charities and I did research and presented at the UN on human trafficking in Kentucky during Derby. So this is not new. We know at that point, we had no idea about how many children were also victims. So what this is doing, we have another $1 million grant that is going to focus on labor trafficking and adults. This is another beautiful opportunity and resources as a result of the work of Dr. Middleton and her team to focus on child sex trafficking, which has really been at the background. As we looked at trafficking in general, we mostly have focused on adults. So we know adults are there. We know we need to tackle that. We have another $1 million to do that work. Today, we're focusing on child sex trafficking, and Project Pivots is about child sex trafficking. So thank you, and I appreciate you asking the question.
And just think about the importance of this tool. You have a child, maybe even a young child, that's been exploited by a parent. The person we're supposed to be able to trust most in life, the person that's supposed to fight for us, not take advantage of us. And having that right tool to where that child can give you the information when they most likely want to protect that person, even though they're harming them, is so important for us to be able to do the right thing by that child. Tom Latek, Kentucky Today.
Hello, Governor. In some businesses, like let's say restaurants and bars, servers have to take training to recognize when people have had too much and they should be cut off from alcohol. Have you given any thought to perhaps championing some legislation, or maybe even through regulation, having like hotels employees be trained in what to look for when it comes to human trafficking?
Thanks for the question, Tom. I did that as Attorney General. We had a program where we launched and even certified hotels that would train all their workers across Kentucky to recognize the signs of human trafficking. It was because the first victim that we saved in the Attorney General's office just shortly after I became AG was because a hotel clerk saw something that looked off and made a call. And that's all that it takes. I know we are moving the Human Trafficking Task Force, not the task force, but the law enforcement unit inside, the cold case unit inside the Attorney General's office, inside the Kentucky State Police now. And so we're going to be looking for more opportunities to get out in front on the education piece, especially now that we're going to see more people out and about. The tool is also pretty important because a lot of those that may have been exploited in this last year may have had fewer opportunities to ask for help and to seek help. So now is the time. There's incumbent on all of us. When you see something wrong and the signs are out there, and Free to Hope does a lot of education on it, many others, and we've got to continue that. It's an everybody together issue that we've got to address. We need people to be willing to make that call, even though it's uncomfortable. All right, tough topic, but it's something that occurs, and these are folks that need our help. Oftentimes the most vulnerable, oftentimes the most marginalized. My faith teaches me that this is exactly who. We got to be making sure that we're protecting exactly who we have to be helping. And we're going to fight every single day from the governor's office, and I'm sure in every other branch of state, city, and local government, and to make sure that we reach a point in time where this never happens to any Kentucky child, or for that matter, adult. Thank you all, and we'll keep up the fight.